This is week 2, lecture 6. In week 2, we will focus on certain key concepts related to gender, theatre and performance. In the 6th lecture, we will talk about what is gender and we will try to understand the concept of gender. This particular lecture covers the definition of gender, the basic conceptual understanding of gender with certain examples, and we will also analyze gender as a performative term through example of a play by Manjula Padmanabhan's Harvest. Moving ahead, when gender is defined, many critics have explained it as a social construct, that gender is not biological, it is not natural, but it is socially assigned. It is socio-cultural construct. And if something is constructed, it can be reconstructed, it can be rebuilt, it can be revised and made again in a different way. What could be the alternative of gender? So these are the questions that we are posing in the current lecture. Gender, which is defined as social construct, is called a performative act. Gender is performative according to a postmodern thinker, Judith Butler. Gender is called an ideology that naturalizes social performance and reinforces the inequality between the sexes. Whereas sex is biological, gender focuses on the values and meanings in the context of society and cultural context assigned on the female and male body. Gender is a system of values and meanings. Gender creates binary, where a male is conditioned to become man and carries masculinity or masculine attributes, whereas a female becomes woman and carries feminine attributes. But these attributes are socio-cultural. These are assigned and not natural by birth, that comes naturally to one. Basically, we are talking about the body which is assigned a gender role, and by repeated stylization of the body, in the words of Judith Butler, by repeated acts, the stylization of the body, by repeated performance of gender, one becomes one, either man or woman. So this binary category or this classification of the two is created by society. It's a social construct which is questioned by feminist and gender activists that we are discussing today in this current lecture. When Butler stated that gender is a copy with no original and told that gender is a performative act, it suggested that gender is played out or the role is played out, which is repeated to get recognized or to get validated within the socio-cultural context. So primarily we see that gender is not something that one is, but what one does. Gender refers to set of actions. Gender as a verb is being used here, where we see that it connotes a set of acts that reasserts, confirms and validates one's identity in terms of gender, whether that person is man or woman. This binary classification is questioned because gender is not limited to these two categories, but it is beyond. The other marginal sexual identities are not recognized in this binary category, which is problematized by gender theorists. Though it is performative, but gender is not a choice that one can choose to become something. Rather, it is assigned and a compulsory act. One cannot be without gender. One cannot be without gender in the society and survive at the same time. The social beliefs and norms make someone perform the assigned role that one is assigned to. For example, men playing the role of a breadwinner for the family, a man being a husband or a father or a son of someone, or a woman as a wife or a daughter-in-law or a mother. We do not see them as individual or a human being who are beyond that. One's identity is limited to their gendered identity, their roles that they play, and they are not considered as a human being who are not merely this but also beyond that. Or one is not asked, how do you identify yourself? Which is very important for us to recognize anyone. It is not asked, it is assigned, and it is a compulsory act, which has been questioned by thinkers like Butler, Shulamit Firestone, Simone de Beauvoir, Kate Millett, and many other thinkers, especially from late 18th century onwards. We have many such scholars who have questioned the construction of identity on the basis of one's gender, and that too on the binary basis, the two-way classification, either this or that, the opposites. Ironically, men and woman are the two terms, and in school it is taught to us that these are opposite of each other, whereas we see that these are just two genders, and there are many more. But one is opposite of the other, or man is opposite of woman, or woman is opposite of man, father opposite of mother. This binary has been created by the society. These are not opposite, these are two different cultural entities who are playing out their roles in the society and performing their gender as per societal norms and pressure. According to Butler, gender is a performative construct and there is no gender identity that precedes language or outside of language. For example, the very act of saying when a child takes birth, it's a boy or it's a girl, or one is asking, the visitors, the relatives, everyone asks. When the child takes birth, the first question which is asked, not how is the child or what is the health of child, or how is the mother, what about their health. The first question which is asked is whether it's a boy or a girl. So in the very beginning, the gender is assigned, it is asserted. And how it is asserted? Through language. So language is the primary tool to assert gender, someone's gender. When we call someone with the assigned gendered role, that person perform it and it is confirmed. So a girl perform as girl and a boy is conditioned in the way that he performs in that way, and they are raised in such a way through social conditioning that what they were performing, they became that. Here we see further how this binary works and how the binary of masculinity and femininity are socially performed and how it is represented. Now we see masculinity has certain attributes attached with it. For example, masculinity is synonym of strength, rationality, assertive nature, breadwinner, men as breadwinner of the family, men as dominant, masculinity being rational, competitive, tough, ambitious. So all these adjectives are attached with the idea of the concept of masculinity. Whereas on the other hand, we find femininity is projected as sensitive, passive, caregiver, submissive, emotional, cooperative, delicate, empathetic, caring, mothering. So, another binary which has been created is man as rational and woman as emotional, man as competitive and woman as submissive. So, these are the attributes which are attached with masculinity and femininity, which are assigned to necessarily to men as masculine and women as feminine. We cannot imagine female masculinity or male femininity. We cannot imagine the society, though there are existence of all. There are multiple gender identities existing in the society. Some are gender neutral, some are bi-gender, some are believing in different genders, and some are beyond that. Some are transsexual, transgender, and there are many other identities which have been existing, are identified in these gender studies but not acknowledged, and there is no acceptance in the society where they are equally accepted as a human being. It's a basic right of every human being to live with dignity, to be respected, and to be able to come up with their own identity and not to hide it. Because if someone follows the identity which is assigned to that person, but he is not internally believing that, or he believes that he is something else, or he believes in a different, he identifies himself with a different sexual identity, then it will be an internal conflict, and that person will be continuously into internal conflict that may lead to serious medical issues. That is why it's very important for a person to know one's identity, true identity, and be able to represent oneself in that identity. Further, we see gender as a fluid term. It's not fixed. Since it is performed again and again and it needs reassertion, it's a fluid term. Fluid means it is not fixed. It is not fixed, it keeps on changing, and it needs repeated performance to reassert it again and again, to validate it. Here we see how the stereotypes are established, where we see masculine as physically strong, confident, provider, risk taker, non-emotional, breadwinners, whereas feminine as pleasing, collaborative, caregiver, listener, and emotional. So these are the stereotypes which are established. But we have several examples around us where we see often we may not find necessarily woman as submissive or men as strong enough as it is projected. But there has been always a pressure of performing that ideal image of men, or woman being in the pressure of performing that ideal image of woman. Moving ahead, we see how gender is asserted, how it is performed through assertions, through utterance. Language plays a very important role here. Another example is, we see when a priest asks in a marriage ritual and the partners respond, I do. So when they say I do, marriage is pronounced. The promise of marriage takes place. So I do is something, when they utter it, it is an action in itself. They are not moving from their place. They stand and they say I do, and marriage is confirmed. So this utterance itself stands for action, and how important it is to understand that language plays a very important role to reassert gender norms, to reconfirm the gender binary. So the concept of performative utterance was developed by British thinker J.L. Austin in the 1950s, and Austin wrote that the utterance is itself the act, by giving an example of a wedding ceremony which I have just mentioned. Another example here, use of color pink and blue. another binary has been created that the color pink is related to the feminine gender and blue suggests the masculine. Many a times we see that whenever the gender of the child is disclosed, it's more popular in Western country, but also now it has there is an increasing popularity of this particular idea in India as well, where the gender is announced through a video or to the relatives and public by showing two different colors of balloons are chosen or cake is chosen, either blue or pink, and that reveals or discloses the identity, gender identity of the child. So this is another binary that we have been creating. Through color we are identifying the gender. In language we have seen, though from 20th century onwards, with the help of French feminists, there was a change, and in language the gender connoted terms are identified. But before that there are certain terms which were easily used and never marked out that language could also be gender biased or these words are gender specific. For example, use of the word man for humankind. So if every gender is to be addressed, all the gender, for all gender the word man is used, but for all genders woman word cannot be used because woman suggests woman only, but man suggests humankind, mankind in totality. Later on it was pointed out by French feminists saying that this is problematic because the word itself is very gender specific and that has to be questioned. And later on the word human replaced the word man when it is to suggest the larger masses, all the genders, and also mankind is replaced with humankind, that includes all the genders. Apart from it, we see there are other terms like chairman is a common word which has often been used, but when woman comes in that role holding a chair, the word chairman as a term is not appropriate for her. That is why a gender neutral term is used called chairperson that includes all. We also see often there is a very common ordinary word all of you must have seen that we call a young girl or a young boy both as an adult person calls them or any guardian relative calling them as beta. A girl child is also called as beta, but can in a similar way the word beti be used for a young boy? It cannot be, because the word beti suggests the girl child only. It stands for the girl child, it stands for woman only, female only, but beta becomes a gender neutral word, which it is not. So many such words in different dialects and in English, as I had given example of it, are there which we can mark out, which are marked by many feminists, and we can also do an activity on our own, finding out such terms and make a list of it, and we will be able to mark out how in language we are very commonly using gender specific words without being aware of it. There are certain statements that reasserts masculinity. If woman is not born as woman and she becomes a woman, man is also not born as a man but becomes so due to certain social norms that one has to follow. One becomes a particular gender, one is raised as a particular gender, and he or she behaves in that way. For example, there are certain statements whenever we find men getting weaker or a boy into emotional state due to certain circumstances, we say behave like a man, or boys will be boys. So these statements reassert that what you are doing is not appropriate and you should follow social norms. You cannot be so emotional, don't behave like a girl. Often we are the people like guardians, parents, often using these kinds of statements saying that, be a boy, be a man, behave like a boy. So in these ways we reassert through utterance the gender normativity. We normalize the practices related to the binary gender identities, and that's how conditioning of mind take place in the society, where one is raised how society expects one to be. In different fields like career, sports, disciplines in education, we see there is a conception that certain sports or certain disciplines are meant for girls, and certain sports disciplines and areas, fields are more of masculine, it's meant for men. For example, we see that maths and technical subjects are, it is suggested that engineering, technology, mathematics are, men are more interested into that, since their mind is capable to get trained into it and they can perform better. But women they can perform better into teaching and nursing. This was a general perception for a very long time in Indian sensibility, but now things are changing, since girls are performing well, and in every field we are seeing their visibility, men also being visible in other areas. Even the cooking, which is merely an art, is assigned to women, but it's just an art and anyone can perform it. In 5-star hotels, we find chef performing the role of the chief cook, or the other people are also those who are cooking there. So it is an art which can be done by anyone, and it has nothing to do with what one is as a person, either man or woman, anyone can do it, because it's a skill which can be inculcated through training. Further, we see the idea of gender is connected with the idea of identity, because ultimately we are talking about one's identity, how one identify oneself and how society sees that person. So what is I basically? What is this self? If I have to answer, who am I? How would I answer it? There are number of social connotation and identification that the person will go through. This I can relate to the region, this I can relate to the gender, this I can also relate to the city, to the place, to the caste, to the class, to the race, to the nationality that one person belongs to. So for Sigmund Freud, who is a well-known scholar of psychology, who stated that the identity, personality or the self is constituted by a series of identification, the partial identification which never completed. The identification goes on. So gender based identity is always contested and it is never final. A child initially when he is young may identify himself with his mother or parents. Later on he may identify himself as a student of so and so institute, and then later he feels that he is working in this field and he identifies himself with that profession or with that social identity, the community based identity or nation based identity. So what matters to him or her at what point of time, that is contested. And how he or she identify oneself, that is very important, that is to be asked. But within the social norms, under the pressure, often we chose that identity, we work and perform that identity which society asks one to do, to get into the marriage, to live a familiar life, whether that person desires for it or not. But this is this structure of the society, one has to perform his or her duty accordingly. I had just quoted Simone de Beauvoir, who made this statement, one is not born a woman but becomes one. So this famous statement of Simone de Beauvoir exposes the constructive nature of the other genders as well. One is not born a man but becomes one, or one is not born third gender but becomes that. So gender is a fluid term and it creates the binary like opposites, feminine female or masculine male, and feminine male and masculine female cannot be accepted. Why gender is contested? The problems which are created by gender are inviting hierarchies, making hierarchies, and promoting several stereotypical beliefs, prejudices, discrimination, inequality, social stigmas and violence in society. That is why it is criticized by scholars, feminists and gender activists. In order to question these hierarchies, to break these hierarchies and to bring equality in the society, the idea of gender is being contested. Moving ahead, how it is applicable in the field of theatre. Now, it varies from one gender to the other, but we see body always being socially located as a site to be contested, where we see performance, through performance in theatre, the gender identities are reconstructed. In the previous lecture, I talked about the idea of impersonation and how gender can be performed. It doesn't matter whether a man is performing or a woman is performing, male actor is performing or a female actor is performing. But in the performance, the role that he is playing matters, and it also suggests that gender can be performed on stage. We see the performance taking place, and that also creates a kind of awareness and establishes the fluid nature of gender, that it can be performed by anyone, any identity can be performed by anyone. That is why it is performative in nature. Theatre reasserts it. There is a term, before we move ahead towards the analysis, we need to be clear about it. What is queer? Queer stands for whatever is at odds with the normal, the legitimate and the dominant. So whatever is at odds with the normal, the legitimate, so normal means normative. It could be normal for the society, may not be normative or normal for the person who doesn't identify oneself as a man, or either as a man or a woman. So queer stand for the spectrum of gender, the other colors of gender, who cannot be identified either as men or as women. Queer is an umbrella term that includes several other colors or spectrums, and various identities are included in this umbrella term called queer. Now we move towards the analysis, and we will be talking about Manjula Padmanabhan's play Harvest. She is a well-known modern Indian English playwright. She is an Indian writer, playwright, short story writer, a cartoonist, but she writes in English. In one of her interviews, she spoke, "In a certain sense, we are all experimenting with sexual social borders. With every choice we make, whether it is to wear bindi or use contraception or to eat garlic or eggs, every time we choose something, it is establishing our identity, it is creating our identity. We are making also choices." So she defines in her own way how she takes gender as a term. In her plays like Lights Out, Harvest, Hidden Fires, we find a very strong representation of voice of a person, be it man or woman, especially female identity is reasserted in a very strong way in her plays. One of her plays, which is award-winning play named Harvest, is taken up here to explain the concept of gender to you. Here we see some of the, on the screen you can see these are the enactment of her play Harvest on stage, and we will meet certain characters here who are facing various issues and performing their gender normative roles. There are 4 characters in the play primarily, but Jaya's character is leading here, who is watching around what is happening and having a critical mind. She can't help speaking out. She is a daughter-in-law of the house. It's a small apartment of a lower middle class family who are living in a metropolitan city, and this apartment is in a huge building where they have shared bathrooms. This condition of this family is pathetic because the breadwinner of the family, Om, who is Jaya's husband, has lost his job. He was working as a clerk, but many of the profession's jobs are replaced now by technology, by machines. That is why people are losing their job in a country like India. That shows us how the life will become in future if body will be commodified. And when no option is left for him, he is jobless and he has to take care of his family, he has to bring money to family and he has to make them survive. And for the survival, he became a donor of organs. And he sold out the body organ to an American man via a company, Interplanta Center. And after that, life changed for him. Because initially, though he had an idea, but he could not understand the seriousness of the matter, and later on he realized that there is nothing more precious than your own body, because without it, you have no identity, you are nothing. And as a donor, they were given good amount of money and every facility was provided by the one to whom he donated, who was a wealthy person. They did not know who he is. They were merely the donor and the one who is a receiver. So this play is about the commodification of human body, that in the futuristic time, the way things are changing, the time is growing materialistic, and technology, with the technological advancement, many of the manual jobs will be replaced by the machines, and then the body will be commodified and the organ donation, organ trade will be a serious issue, will be a crime. Here we find Jaya saying, a room in which two people think and the other two don't exist, where she talks about she has a thinking mind. She doesn't like that she has no say in the family or she is not making any decision. We also see Om's condition, Om Prakash, who is responsible for the family to take care of it. His condition is pathetic because after making a lot of effort, he could not get a job, and that is why he donated his organ. And Om was under tremendous pressure to play the role of a breadwinner for his family, and he was not only by others but he was also taunted by his own mother for bringing money to the family. And he failed to do that, and he becomes an organ donor, which restricted him from going out of his home. After becoming a donor, he was restricted to go out of his house, to go out of his apartment, and he was restricted to go on a diet, to survive on the diet which is decided by the receiver of the body organs. It's a pathetic life that he is leading that ultimately leads to a tragic end. We see there is a statement that comes here where we find American society in 1950s facing, where there was a firm expectation that required men to grow up, to marry and support their wives. To do anything else was less than grown up, and the man who will willfully deviate was just to be somehow less than a man. If someone fails to take care of the family, he is not considered as a man or not properly respected in the society, which creates a problem. So gender binary is a very practical matter, and it creates various challenges in the society, those who perform it under the pressure. It's not merely women who face challenges, but men and any other gender identity we can take up, that we will be taking in coming lectures, where we will see how these identities, when imposed, becomes a problem and the conflict begins. With this, I close this lecture, and next time we will talk about other key concepts. Thank you so much.